Okay, so we're up to over here in Ois Zayin. The Rebbe is continuing to explain now from the Maimer, from Yud how come uh, a person changes, the person changes from one to the other. So he explains that um, by Hashem we say, Ki lo odom hu v'yinechem, that Hashem doesn't change his mind, but a person over there change his mind. And the reason is because the person's midos, his emotions, the expression of his feelings are based on his intellect. The intellect dictates the emotions. And because the intellect dictates in the emotion, if there is a change in the intellect and the understanding, there will be a change in the emotions. So the reason midos change is because the intellect changes. The Rebbe is going to explain not only does the intellect impact midos that are based on the intellect, even natural midos tivios that we have in nature, they too are brought about through the intellect. That's why, for example, we say when they went out to war, there is a prohibition against getting worried, even though worried of war is a natural. But yet we're telling you don't think about it because the way it's going to come out is through your thinking about it. That's going to create that worry. The same thing is when it says to love Hashem. So we say we have to reflect, and when you reflect, you will get to the love. Is because the emotions are dominated by the intellect, and the intellect changes. And then he's going to explain that the intellect also changes because of Ratzon, as we're continuing to learn in Maamar. Zayin. And the idea is the Hine Kesiv. The pasuk says Lefi Sichloi Yehulol Ish, that a person will be praised, and the Ish represents Midos, as we'll see. The name Ish represents the motions of the person. So based on his seichel, according to his intellect, that's how the Midas are Yehulol Ish v'yadua, because it's known. That the fact a person is called Ish, that's from the perspective, that's because of his emotions. This is the difference between the describing a human as Adam or describing him as Ish. When we talk Adam, we're saying, oh, what am I? That's talking about his intellect. When we talk about Ish, we're talking about his emotion. The Masha Nikra B'Shem Adam, this that he is called with the name Adam, Umitzad HaSeichel Shabai. That's because of the intellect that's in the person. Umasha Nikra B'Shem Ish, and this that is called with the name Ish, Umitzad HaMidas Shabai. That is because of his midas. Upirush Lifi Sichla Yehulal Ishu. What is the meaning that according to the Seichel, the midas are Lifi Sichla, according to Seichel, is the Ish will be Mehulalu? The Gam Hamidas Shab Adam Ish, that also the midas, the Ish of the person, the Ish, Haim Lifi Sichloi, they are also based on his intellect. Lifi Sichloi, according to his intellect, Yehulalish, that's how the midas are praised, that's how the midas are measured, and the midos are dependent upon the intellect. V'hainu, and this is talking about the gam hamidos tiviyis sheba adam. When we're saying that the midos is based on the intellect, we're not talking about midos that are created out of the seichel, from seichel, but we're talking about natural, even natural midos that the person has. You know, he has them inherently. They're part of his nature. So, im heyois she'etzem mitziuson hu mitzad hateva. Although that the essence, where is they come from, what is their entity, is nature, mitzad hateva. Udeloi k'amidas sichlis, unlike the intellectual midas, Shekol mitziuson hu mitzad haseichel. Their entire existence comes from the seichel. That's the difference. The natural midas are there beforehand. They come from nature. Intellectual midas come only as a result of the seichel. But here we're talking about even the natural midas, which are there by themselves, they're not beforehand. They're nature. They're not created. Their mitzvahs does not come from seichel. They too, hein misoireres al yidei haseichel. They are woken up. They are aroused through seichel. Seichel brings them about. The seichel brings about and wakes up the midas. Now this explains the zeu mashakosuv. This is what the pasuk says. Al yerach levavchem al tirogem. The pasuk tells them, don't let your heart be faint, and don't be afraid, women. So what is the shaykhs to say? Seemingly telling somebody, don't be afraid. Afraid is an emotion. He's afraid. Seemingly that's a natural phenomenon. To be afraid at war, that's natural. How could you instruct and say, no, don't be afraid? That's a natural thing, is to be afraid. So what's the explanation? The explanation is that the afraid, the midos, that emotional feeling of fear, also comes from understanding. Even though it's a natural, it comes from understanding. If you dwell on it, you focus on it, and then the fear comes out. The explanation is, so how come it's saying you don't be afraid when it's a natural? Since the arousal of the natural midas comes through the intellect, therefore, when he places his mind and his thought about the fear, he puts his mind and his thought, his heart is not going to be faint, he's not going to be afraid, he's not going to be worried at all. Why? Because he's not going to allow for those midas hativiyot to wake up. How's he going to do that? Anybody who starts to think, to reflect in war, and he scares himself, he shocks himself, he's violating a prohibition. As the pasuk says, al yerech levavchem al tirogem. So the prohibition is against thinking and reflecting about war, to shock yourself, to worry yourself. Then you're violating a loisa. Torah says al yerech levavchem. So the issue is here thinking about it. Natural. It's a nature thing that you worry about it. The gam yira tivis misaides upaelis, because also this natural love is awoken and works and impacts. Is when you think and you reflect on it. That's when it works. So meaning that even though it's tividik midos, but you have to think about it in order to get that midos to wake up and to start functioning. So it turns out that even the natural midos are part of the intellect, that the intellect guides and directs them. So this is natural midos of the nefesh habahamis, of the person himself. The same thing is also in the nefesh halikis with its love and fear, that even the natural love that the neshama has for Hashem, as the Alter Rebbe says, still that love will not come out if he doesn't think about it. So the person's seichel Yehulul Ish will bring about his love to Hashem. This is by the nefesh elikis. Before we were talking about person in general, his natural fears. Here we're talking about the godly soul. V'chein hu gam b'nefesh elikis. Same thing is also with the godly soul. The gam hamidos tiviyos shalom, even its natural emotions. His oiruson hu al yidei hasechel. How are they awoken? How are they arise? That's through the asechel. The zeu mashakosu. This is what the pasuk says. V'ahavta Hashem elikecha. We have a tzivui. We have a command to love Hashem. Now, how we're going to love Hashem when we already love Hashem inherently? It's a nature. Why do we need a command for that? But without a command, the seichel dictates and helps the emotions come out. That's why it says, "Vashkosav Aptus Hashem Elikecha." The Hagam shekol echad mi Yisrael b'tivoi oyeves Hashem. Even though that every Jewish person naturally loves Hashem, uketeres hadmur hazokin, as the Alter Rebbe writes, as the teaching of the Alter Rebbe. Today is the Alter Rebbe's yahrzeit. Today is Chof Dalet Tevis. Shekol echad mi Yisrael einay reitze b'shum eifen, that every Jewish person does not want, under no circumstances, Bein Yochel is not able, klal, at all, liyas nifrat chaz v'sholem elikus, to be separated, God forbid, from godliness. So this is a nature that no Yid wants to, is not able to be separated, God forbid, from godliness. So why do we need a command to love Hashem? We're loving Hashem automatically. Naturally, we love Hashem. So why is the pasuk say v'ahavta? Yet still there is a command on this. Why? Ki ava tivis his oirusa hi al yidei his bonus. Because that natural love, yes, it's there, but how do you awaken? How do you arouse it? Is through his bonus. V'alzehu hatzivui sheyizboinem b'dvorim hamoirinus ava. So that's the command. The command is for the person reflect in things to wake up the Ava, because while you have that natural Ava on your own, but we need to wake it up, and that comes through reflection. And this idea, why do we need to wake it up? Why isn't it on by itself? Is not just because it's in a body, it's a nefesh habahamis, it has to struggle, but even for the nefesh elikis itself, an inherent midah needs to come out through his shayrish from the seichel. And this idea, the his shayrish ha'ava hi alidei his boinenus, that the arousal, the waking up of the ava is through reflection, is not only because the obscurity of the animal soul that doesn't allow for the nefesh elikis of a mela, you need to push through the nefesh habahamis. No, not only that. The elegam mitzad nefesh elikis, even from the side of the godly soul by itself. Because the emotions that the person has, this is his natural emotions. And certainly the godly midos, the love of Hashem, fear of Hashem, etc., they are according to the seichel. So basically we see that all of midos, whether they're natural or not natural, whether they're nefesh habahamis or nefesh elikis, all need the seichel to arouse them, to wake them up, to bring them into action. So the nefesh elikis itself needs that arousal. But it also needs reflection to overcome the nefesh habahamis as well. On the other hand, gam la'achri nefesh elikis nislapsho beguv nefesh habahamis. So Mela, the nefesh elikis is aroused by the seichel. But who says that the seichel is going to have such power that it can overcome the when the nefesh elikis dresses up in the nefesh habahamis, that there too the seichel will force the emotions to come through, break through even the nefesh habahamis. The inyan zed the Cyrus Habed is benus ulidoch gam laachrish nefesh elikis nislapsha beguf nefesh habahamis. Even after he dressed up in the guf nefesh habahamis, al days benus chulu through reflection behechrech shahava hativis the nefesh elikis tovei begibri. We have to say that the natural love of the nefesh elikis will break through the nefesh habahamis and it'll be open. So we have to say that the power will applies even after the nefesh elikis is dressed in nefesh habahamis, that the love of the nefesh elikis will come out openly, because that's how you'll be mekayim the mitzvah of Haftas Hashem Elikecha through the Hizbonenus. The mezeh gufa shekol echad mi Yisrael nitztav lev es Hashem, because from the fact that each one has been commanded to love Hashem, so it must mean that we have the ability to love Hashem, that his utterance of love will come through. Otherwise, how are we going to love Hashem? We have to love Hashem, neshama beguf, in the nefesh habahamis. Muchach shezatolu b'bchirosei. So that's evident that it up to his choice. We have a choice to love Hashem. When the nefesh elikis is dressed up in the nefesh habahamis, we're commanded, we have to love Hashem. So maybe you're going to say, no, maybe we're not going to be able to have a love. The vahavta means you should reflect. Whether you have a love or not, that's not part of the mitzvah of vahavta Hashem Elikecha. The mitzvah is you have to reflect on the levels of love. But who says that you have to also accomplish to love actually Hashem? Fakir, the Rebbe says, and you can't say, maybe it doesn't break through the nefesh habahamis, the love. Reflection, his bonus will not create a level of love in your heart. Why is there a command? So he says, he proves it. A command to love Hashem, it means that you have the choice. And you can't say the command is just for reflection. Kosov Admar Hazokin, as the Alter Rebbe writes, Shekibel Mehabal Shem Tov, he has received from the Baal Shem Tov, Shemitzvahs v'ahavtoi liskoya machshavtoi v'daitoi, that the mitzvah v'ahavtoi, what does it mean to love? To stick your thought and your mind b'dvorim ha'me'erinus ha'ava, from matters that wake the ava. That is the mitzvah. And that what comes from this, the actual love, that's not the main mitzvah. That's what the Alter Rebbe writes that in the name of the Baal Shem Tov. That the mitzvah is not what comes from it, the mitzvah is to reflect. So maybe Itaka doesn't bring to the level of love. The Rebbe says we can't say that. Because the Pasuk says you should love Hashem. What does it mean? Can't take away from the Pasuk. Pirush HaPasuk v'ahavto. Usheyoev es Hashem. Yev es Hashem. V'ahavto means you should love Hashem. Love means loving in actuality, to love Hashem. So umizem muchach. So from this it's evident the kol echad echad mi Yisrael, that each and every one of the Yidden, k'sheyizbeinen bazeh, when you will reflect on it, on the love of Hashem, and reflect on items that bring about the love. He'll also pay attention. It's a must. It's absolutely going to happen. It has to happen that in the end he's going to have the love of Hashem. Okay, so this is basically the Rebbe explains that all of the emotions is based upon the intellect. This is what the Maimer says. That by the emotions of the person, it can change from kindness to judgment and from judgment to kindness. Since the emotions of the person are based on the seichel, and therefore, when his mind dictates differently, becomes a change in the emotions. Because if the intellect dictates chesed, he gives chesed. If it dictates sichlei din, it dictates the judgment, and the person can change his mind, and therefore there's a change in the midas because the emotions are based on the intellect. And the Rebbe is going to talk now in Oisches that there is from the Maimer of the Mittler Rebbe that there is 3 levels in the midas. Just like a baby is born, there's the fetus, the way it's in the mother's womb. Over there, it mamish lives from the mother in the mother's womb. And then when it comes out of the mother's womb and it comes into the world, it still nurses from the mother. It grows from the mother. And then even after it's weaned and it no longer nurses from the mother, still there's a connection between the child and the mother. So in our case, we talk about the different levels of emotion as it relates to seichel. We have the midas the way they are in the seichel, like a fetus in the mother's womb. The midas are in the seichel. Then you have, as the midas already come out from the seichel, but they're still nursing from the seichel. And then we have the way they are outside. Let's look inside. Because to understand this idea in more detail, based upon what the Mittler Rebbe writes in Teres Chaim. The midas yesh bechlolus gimel madregas. There's 3 steps, 3 levels in midas. Ibur, that's the pregnancy. Yenika, when it nurses. Umoichin, and then when it's the level of the intellect, the independence. So he explains. The zeu shahamidos nikroim b'shem tzemeach. Midas are called growing. Tzemeach, they're growing. What does it mean that the midas are growing? And the difference, just like a baby grows from the fetus, it goes from the mother's stomach to later on becoming growing constantly. So midas are also growing. They're constantly growing. As when we talk about the 4 categories of the inanimate, the growing, the living, and the speaking, that's in the human being, the microcosm, in the world in general, and then there's in the person, the Demitzumechai. The midas are called growing. They're growing from little, they become big. That's the level of midas. Shabodom. The bechinas achai sheba'odom hu haseichel. The chai, the living in the person, that's his intellect. That's the growing within the person. So in any event, that's why the midas are called tzemeach. Why? Kitzmichas v'hagdolas hamidas, because the sprouting, the growth of the emotion, it's in a way that the emotions change from one step to the other step. As they grow from one level to the next level, from one step to the other step. That's how they grow. So you have ibur, you have pregnancy, then you have nursing, it explains. Bechinas ibur hi hamidus k'moshe in alomis hadayim b'hasechel. When we talk about the level of pregnancy, that's the way the midas are hidden in the intellect. So the main thing is the intellect. Inside the intellect, you have emotion in the intellect. That's the first of the midas. They're hidden. They are still hidden in the seichel. That's dugmas uber shebebeten haim. That's similar to a fetus which is in his mother's stomach. Ubchinas yinika. And the second level, nursing, as we say, that's the midas already. They're no longer hidden in the intellect, but they're already extended to the heart. They are then also growing from the intellect. Just like a nursing baby is still growing from the mother, same thing is the midas are growing from the seichel that inspires them. So the midas are connected to the moichin. And actually, the biggest of the growth of the child is not in his mother's womb. It's already when it comes out. So that's what it says, va'adarabe. On the contrary, not only do they still grow once they left the moichin, but ozu iker ha'agdola shalahem. The main growth of the midos is when they're separated. And they're in the heart, been separated from the moichin. Dugmas hatinuk, this is similar to the child. Shegam la'achre shenoilad v'nase mitzias bifnei atzmi, that also after he was born, and he became an entity by himself, he still nurses from his mother's milk. That's how his limbs grow, is through nursing from his mother. So you see, he has to have that connection, that nursing that comes from the mother that gives him the growth. To the extent that the main growth of the baby is at the time when he nurses. So that's the level of Yinika. Then you have B'chinas Moichin. What's the midas when they become to the level of Moichin? That's the emotions, the way they are grown. Gadlus HaMoichin. From the midas are grown. Bedugmas have lad. This is similar to the child after the period of nursing. Begam midas elu. So also these midas, after they've been grown, mekablis mehamoichin, they also receive from moichin. Mibchinas gadlus hamoichin, from the level of gadlus hamoichin, gives the gadlus hamidas kimvur b'teres chaim sham, as explained in Teres Chaim over there. So now this gives us further understanding. Yuvan hatam al zeh. We'll understand the reason. The kasher ha-seichel mechayiv be'ofen achen. That when the intellect dictates differently, nase shinu b'hamidis, makes a change in the emotion, kimavur li'il ma'amaimer dahi lula, as explained earlier from the Maimer of the Yartzeit. So we understand now the mekivon shegam la'acharei shahamidis nimshchu b'leiv. Since even after the midos have already been extended into the heart, the nasu metzias b'fnei atzmo, and they became an independent entity. Now they're midos in the heart. Still, hey mekablim mahaseichel, they still get from the seichel. Bedugmas hatinuk, similar to the child, shegam la'achri shenoilad v'yotzu la'avid ha'olam, that even after he was born and he went out to the ear of the world, he still nurses from his mother's milk. And we said even more than that. Not only when he nurses, but even afterwards, when he's totally grown up, he still receives from the gadlus hamoichin. The gadlus, even the midas of the gadlus get from the seichel. Therefore, when there's a change in the intellect, mishtanim gam hamidus, also the midas changed. The Rebbe explained here from Teres Chaim the connection, the relationship between the midas and the seichel. That the seichel's connection to the midas is ongoing. First in a level of ibur, but then it comes to the level of yinika, in which the midas are independent, and still they connected to the moichin, and certainly, and also even when it's fully grown up, they still connected to the moichin. So now we see that deep connection. But mainly we see why a change in the intellect will impact a change in the emotions, and that's why there's a change over there. And then, so this is the reason there's a change in the emotions, because there's a change in the seichel. Rebbe will continue, but there is also what brings a change in the level of seichel. Why does seichel change? Here we're talking about seichel changes the midas, and there's the reason why seichel changes, and also because of the level of rotzen, as we will continue. All right, we'll leave it over here.
Okay. Have a good Shabbos.